I've been wanting to incorporate a little bit more insight of what it's like for a child-free man. So today I'm going to react to this video right here. Welcome to Wife Without Kids. I'm Hannah. This channel is all about building a positive and non-judgmental community to support you in your child-free lifestyle.
I don't want children. And for the majority of my adult life, the past 6 or 7 years, I'm 30 now, I've been pretty confident that I don't want children. But what I haven't been confident about is answering why I don't want children. I think I figured it out. I think the reason I don't want children, I'm not certain that I could recommend this life. Don't get me wrong, I love life. I have a lot to be grateful for. I'm not sure that I can recommend life to a consciousness that otherwise wouldn't experience it.
This is a unique perspective because it's something I've actually never really thought about. I've heard several people say this. They say they almost think it's a bit cruel to bring someone into the world when they've experienced the world already and their experience hasn't been favorable maybe, or maybe there's been more negatives than positive.
I guess on one side, it's asking myself, is all the positives of life experience worth all the negatives and the struggles and the uncertainties? And in particular right now, I'm not overly optimistic about the next 50 years of humanity.
I think we share your sentiment. I don't know that any of us are overly optimistic.
There's so many things that I'm aware of that are kind of impending, and I just don't know if I want to bring someone into this life at this point. I mean, life is already complex. Through technology and our advancements and our globalization and all that stuff, life has become infinitely more complex to the point where it's become challenging to enjoy the simple things in life.
That is such a great point. I think sometimes we have overcomplicated our lives. I love technology, obviously, but sometimes I'm just like, I just wish there was no cell phone and no computer. When I was a little kid, I mean, there were computers then, but we didn't have one in our home. I really didn't grow up with a cell phone. I didn't grow up with a computer. There was a simpler time, and I feel really old saying that, but I feel like I've lived enough now that my childhood was so different than what reality in the world is now.
Because it requires so much work and so much effort in order to raise a family and take care of a family and have housing and get to the point where your finances and your circumstance doesn't really burden your experience of life.
I think it's hard in every generation to get ahead financially, but I think especially in this generation, and given what's been going on the last few years, it's even harder. It's not impossible, but I think people have to be extremely determined and extremely disciplined and kind of play the long game.
Once upon a time, in a 5-person family, one person could work a regular 40-hour-a-week job, and food's taken care of, the accommodations, the housing is taken care of, and you can focus on, the simple joys of life, things that bring you joy.
Unfortunately, I don't think those days are coming back anytime soon.
And don't get me wrong, I'm in that situation right now. I make enough, but just the fact that I don't think civilization is getting better with technology. Sure, things are getting faster. We're able to accomplish more in less time, but then there just becomes more things that we want to accomplish. I don't really know what the end game is, and I just don't know if I want to introduce a life to this. I mean, it's kind of like I might go see a movie, right? And the movie's a 7 out of 10. I enjoyed it, but would I go out and tell another person to watch that movie? Would I recommend that movie to somebody else if it's a 7 out of 10? Probably not. Life has a lot of great things, but would I recommend it to someone who hasn't experienced it?
That's a tough question.
I mean, we have 24 hours in a day, 8 hours sleeping, 8 hours working, then you got 8 hours left. And out of that 8 hours, there's using the washroom and brushing your teeth and preparing meals and cleaning up after meals and getting to and from places. So you really only have a few quality hours per day to truly do whatever you want. I can think of a lot of cons for having children.
I mean, most of us enjoy the sleeping aspect, so that's not so bad. I think that's why you have to enjoy what you do, because if you hate your job and you're spending 40 hours a week working at something you really despise, and I do think a lot of people really don't enjoy what they do, and maybe there's fear of letting that go.
You have less time, you have less freedom, more responsibility, less time to focus on your desires and the things that fulfill you. And I guess one could argue that having children is a form of fulfillment in and of itself. Being able to teach and share and kind of groom and watch life grow.
I think for a lot of parents, having kids has given them meaning in life and has given them fulfillment. And that's part of the reason that so many people, the majority of people, have kids, because I think it gives them a purpose beyond just themselves or beyond just what they could accomplish without kids. But again, that doesn't fit everybody. Not everybody sees that as being something that they want to experience or something that they desire.
If we had the ability to communicate with some other life form in another universe, something like that. Through that communication, they were able to ask, hey, do you recommend this experience? Would I say yes? I don't know.
I think it's also what you have to compare it to. Like, I only have my life that I've lived to compare to, right? The only perspective I have is the one that I'm experiencing right now. I mean, at the end of the day, nobody has a perfect life, although I suppose that would be ideal. Can you imagine a perfect life?
It's not that I don't recommend it outright. The problem is, I don't know if I do recommend it, right? So it's not so much as me saying, life sucks, don't do it. It's like, no, life's pretty good. There's a lot of great things about it.
Oh, yeah.
But is there enough for me to recommend it and say absolutely do it? Because I can't see myself having a child unless I absolutely want to have a child. You probably shouldn't have a child unless you're absolutely certain that you want one.
That doesn't mean you're 100% prepared to do everything that you're going to need to do to deal with the challenges that come. But I think if you have the strong desire, it's much more likely that you can get through the tough times and be like, but everything else is worth it, right?
And I know people say, oh, you don't regret having children, and just after a few years of like struggle, you get used to it. I don't expect anyone who has a child to tell somebody else that they regret having a child in person, because there's a lot of shame that comes with that, and you've already had the child, so you can't go back.
No.
But there's a lot of anonymous forums online, like on Reddit. There's a Reddit called Regretful Parents. It gives you a glimpse into a perspective that is very, very often not spoken about. You can go through the process and come out the other side and actually not be happy with the outcome. Like, you don't hear about that very often.
Don't they always say hindsight is 20/20? We typically choose experiences that appeal to us, and that's why we want to do them. Obviously, when it comes to parents having kids and then looking back and being like, oh man, I really wish I wasn't in the thick of this, the option is just to push through, which is probably why it's really important to want kids. But you can want kids and then realize, oh my goodness, this isn't for me. So that's not always a 100% guarantee.
Because we glamorize this idea of being parents and having children and it's part of life. That's all subjective. And I just don't buy into it. And I don't think anyone should have children just because they feel like they're expected to. To me, that's not a great reason to have children. That's not even a great reason to really do anything, because people expect you to. Experiences are very subjective, and you can have two people go through the exact same experience and one absolutely love it and recommend it, and the other person saying, I would never recommend that in a million years. And part of that is because we're different people and we experience things differently. I do think it's helpful to have feedback from people, but I think it's still something that you have to really want and desire for yourself, regardless of what percentage of people tell you should do it. For anyone that also experiences that desire to not have a child, or feeling like they don't really have that draw towards it, I don't think you shouldn't feel ashamed.
No.
You shouldn't feel that there's something wrong with you, that something in your biology is off, or something, there must be a chemical imbalance in your brain because everyone's having children. There's billions of people on the earth. Why am I one of the few that don't want children? It's like, no, you're not one of the few. You may just be one of the few that actually acts on not having children. If people realized having kids was a choice, I think if they really thought about it instead of just doing it because that's what people are supposed to do or because that's what's accepted in society, I actually think less people would have kids. I still think the majority of people would have kids, but I do think that there's so much pressure placed on people and people feel like it's just something you're supposed to do that they just do it. And they don't let themselves go to that place that says, okay, well, maybe this isn't for me, because they might be ashamed or they might feel like they're not allowed to do that. People out there who didn't want children, or say they don't want children, and then they end up having children. Maybe they just didn't know what else. Maybe they weren't able to find fulfillment in life. They weren't able to find joy in life, and they thought, well, maybe having children is the way. Because I hear about how glorious the experience of parenthood is, and having children and looking through their eyes, knowing that you created that thing. So maybe that's it. And then they do it as a last-ditch effort to find enjoyment or fulfillment or a sense of contribution in life. Sometimes I wonder, how different would the world look if only people who themselves wanted a child actually had a child?
Such a good point. I definitely think less people will be having kids. And what if you didn't use kids or a significant other to fulfill you? What if you just felt fulfilled first in the life that you had, and then you decided to have a kid, rather than using the kid to fulfill you?
So, no sleeping around and someone gets pregnant and oh, we might as well keep it. None of that situation. None of the, I don't really want a child, but my parents or my grandparents or my tradition or religion, none of that stuff. What would the world look, how different would the world look if only the people who themselves wanted to have a child and made the decision to have a child actually had a child?
I think there would be a significant percentage of the population that would not be having kids. And I don't obviously know how significant, but I think people will be having kids for more the right reasons rather than just circumstantial or pressure.
So I think the whole conversation about whether or not someone should have a child is skewed so much towards having a child because there's confirmation bias. There's people that have already had a child that wasn't really sure that if they wanted one in the first place, looking around to try to find a reason to justify the action that they took. People walking around and talking about how great it is to be a parent and to raise a child, only to cover up their deep, dark truth that they didn't want one in the first place and they made a mistake, or they weren't happy that about the decision that they made.
I think parents can feel a lot of shame by saying, oh, I would make a different decision. And that's why I think people don't say it. And I'm not saying that parents should be saying that, and definitely don't be saying that to your kids. I'm not recommending that at all. But I think it's hard for people to admit when they've done something that they would make a different decision on. And I think that's throughout life in general. It would be interesting to see statistically how many people who were child-free regretted the child-free choice versus how many parents that regretted their choice to be a parent. Because I think it probably happens with both.
How many people are doing that? Sometimes I wonder how many people are out there who are on the fence about whether or not to have a child, but they were convinced to have the child by a person who had a child when they didn't want to, and they just have to confirm their decision by saying, well, yeah, it was my decision, I certainly wanted to do that. When in reality, it's just their mind trying to cover up the fact that they didn't want one in the first place. And if they would have just been real, maybe that person that was on the fence wouldn't have had a child.
I do think that definitely happens. That's why I just think for yourself. You can ask other people's opinions, but man, if deep down in your gut you're like, oh, I don't think I want to do this parenting thing, you can just not do it. Because the thing is, you're never going to be alone. There's always going to be somebody that chooses not to have kids. And so if you're afraid of being the weirdo that doesn't have a kid, hello, right here, also don't have a kid. I don't think I'm a weirdo. Don't let that determine whether or not you have a kid because you don't want to be the only one that doesn't have a child. That's why we have online communities like this channel, because you are definitely not alone.
I think about this sometimes. Because even I get that sense of shame, as if if it gets to the point that I'm 45 and I don't have children, I'm going to feel some type of way. And it's not because it's not coming from me, it's coming from my understanding about what people expect. Some people, they haven't even considered the option not to have children because it's such a tradition of life, if you want to call it that. And I think there should be more of a discussion around this. I mean, we have 8 billion people on this earth. The probability of you living a full life and dying in your sleep at the age of 97 is pretty low.
That's literally how I want to die. I just want to die in my sleep. A peaceful death. I've literally told my husband, you just go to sleep one night and then that's a wrap. I mean, it would kind of suck for him to wake up and find me there, but this is getting morbid. I'll just move on.
And I don't mean to offend anybody. This is not even me giving an opinion to try to persuade anybody. It's simply me giving an opinion, period. This is me taking the opportunity to reflect on this on a deeper level and maybe even start a conversation, because having children is a huge responsibility. I can appreciate how much of an impact it can have on changing someone's life, for the better, for the worst.
He brings up a really good point that I just want to clarify. I'm not persuading people to not have kids. I just want to build a community for people who have decided that they don't want kids to feel like they are accepted and that they belong. And I also want people that haven't had kids that might not be sure if they want kids to really think about whether or not they want kids, instead of just doing something because it's what everybody does.
Because you always hear, when people have children, it's like, I don't even remember what my life was without children. My child has become my everything, And it's just, the whole concept of reproduction is kind of funny to me. It's like we grow up, and then we experience life, and then we have a child, so we have a life, and then we dedicate a large part of our life to making sure that life goes pretty well. And it's just a circle of, I'm experiencing life, and part of my experience is giving life to someone else and helping them experience life. It's weird if you really think about it. To really step back and take a look at life from a wide view.
Hearing him say that actually makes me understand a little bit more why people might criticize us when we make the choice to not have kids. Because if your whole thought process is, I am here to create another life, and here you come along being like, nope, my life has a different purpose, and it's not to create another human being.
I guess a part of me does view having children as taking a step back on prioritizing my enjoyment of life, my freedoms that I enjoy in life. I guess part of me does think that having a child is going to be a burden on my experience of life. And I'm well aware that people would argue it's the exact opposite. It's bringing higher levels of saturation to life. It's allowing you to experience life at a higher level. But that's only the good part. People almost like fetish size the concept of having children. And what bothers me is that it's so biased.
Yeah, there's a lot of good in it, but there's also a lot of challenge in it. And I feel like people just don't like to talk about the challenging part. They just like to talk about the good things. And I feel like it's such a false representation of what parenthood actually is. Let's just be honest. You're not just getting the shiny, sparkly parts of raising a kid. You're getting the really hard stuff that makes you want to probably rip your hair out and scream and cry. I'm a child-free person saying that, so take it for what you will.
I do think a large part of people's decision to have a child revolves around them wanting to feel like they'll have an opportunity to be protected and comforted in their old age. Their children will take care of them, and if they need money, if they need help in their old age, they can rely on somebody else. But my thing is that I think it very rarely works out that way. I think people projecting themselves into the future and experiencing loneliness without having children is one of the biggest motivating factors for people having children.
That's true. Who likes to be lonely? Nobody. I don't think that the antidote to loneliness is just filling your life with tons of people so you'll never be lonely, because at some point everyone is going to be lonely for 5 minutes or more.
When I see a child, I don't get that feeling inside where it's like I want that, I want to reproduce, I want to continue to spread my DNA and my genes. I don't get that. Like sometimes you hear people say, "Oh, I can't wait to have a child," and this and that. Maybe it's just like a biological calling that some people have, some people don't. And I think I'm one of the people that don't.
Yes, I love that. It's a biological calling that some people have and some people don't. When you phrase it like that, it makes it seem so much more like acceptable to be child-free, which it should be acceptable to be child-free.
For the majority of human civilization, having children was one of the few ways to really find fulfillment in life. And I think here in 2021 and beyond, there are so many other ways to experience fulfillment. We have so many more options than we did in the past. At one point in time, like family was such a big thing where it's like coming home, you have kids, everything you do it revolves around having kids. And
if we go back even a little bit further, I actually think people had kids out of necessity. Like if you had a farm, you needed to have kids to help work your farm. That's why a lot of families were really big.
Some people find fulfillment in just sharing their ideas and their opinions. Some people find fulfillment in creating art. Some people find fulfillment in the pursuit of perfection, the pursuit of mastery, and putting it out there into the world for people to see and be inspired by it, or to feel positive about it, or to challenge their mind and stimulate them.
I think we need both. I think we do need people who want to be parents and want to raise the next generation, but I also think we need some of the things that he mentioned. And I know someone is going to say, well, a parent can do those things too. Yes, a parent can do those things, but a parent has children, and that typically is their priority. When you have someone that doesn't have kids and has a passion to share something with people, they can throw themselves headlong into that and really give back in a way that a parent probably wouldn't be able to because they are raising their children. And there's nothing wrong with either. I don't think one is better than the other. I think they're both equally valuable. Thank you so much for watching. Remember, you are never alone, and I will see you next week.